Good afternoon. It is Monday, August 31st. Remember, a Monday that I didn't actually meet you all, so a Monday that I'm thinking, what do you all need to know right now? And what you can see here on my screen is what we did at this point in the semester in a previous class. What I would have done is you would have come in having read the Alexie piece, the Barrientos piece, and we would have set on board, okay, what choices did these authors make? What were they trying to do, and how did they do that? Now, that word choices I think is really important because that's part of how I define rhetoric. Remember that rhetoric is the art of making choices to have effects on audiences. So the question is, how were Alexie and Barrientos being rhetorical? And you can see, I know it's kind of messy and there's lines everywhere, that we brought up a whole lot of stuff in this previous semester that you all brought up in your discussion post, which I just read a second ago, by the way. A couple that I can point out is there was repetition. It's not like when Alexie wrote he had to repeat words, but at one point he chose to. I have it in front of me. At one point he said, "I read books late into the night until I could barely keep my eyes open. I read books at recess, then during lunch, and in the few minutes left after I had finished my classroom assignments. I read books," and he keeps repeating sentences. I read books. I read books. I read books. So we could talk about why. We could talk about what the effect is, how it's powerful, how it's memorable, how it makes it sound like a speech. We could talk about how Barrientos does that a couple times too. I'm actually right now less interested in the why and more interested in notice that they did that, and could we steal that idea from them? Yes, that is the heart behind this entire assignment of asking you to write about, let's see, I wrote it over here. How did they write? Because I want to know what we can learn from them, what we can steal from them, what we could adopt as our own, because of course we're going to write essays kind of like this as well. So let me just point out a couple of the cool things that you all brought up, and then I'm going to try to tie this to what I'm asking you to do for Wednesday. I promise this video will be shorter than my last one. Can I just do one small little point first? I think a lot of you know this, but I just figured it's a nice thing to talk about. We're in a writing class. When you're writing about a person, or like an author, do you know how to bring them up, like how to name them? Maybe you're like, what are you talking about? How to name them? Always give their first and last names the first time you bring them up. First time you mention them, like in your writing, right? And then just the last name later. This is not something that I was looking for, trying to get you on. I know these are very informal homework, so I don't really care. But it's kind of worth knowing, right? It makes you look good if you do it kind of like this. If you say, in Sherman Alexie's piece, you can call it an essay if you want, Superman and Me. By the way, this is another thing I'm doing, is that I'm putting article titles, like essay titles, like small things, in quotation marks. That's always what you do with a small thing like this. If it was like a book, you'd put in italics. In Sherman Alexie's piece, Superman and Me, he blah 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 blah. Later, Alexie also, just I kind of have given myself the right to say Alexie because I said Sherman Alexie the first time. With Barrientos, it's a little trickier because her name that she uses for this publication, that's what you go by, whatever they use and whatever you have in front of you. She's got a longer name, Tanya Maria. I can't roll my R's very well in Barrientos. So I would use this the first time and then Barrientos every time after that, right? If you're not sure, do some Googling, look it up, see how other people refer to these people. They're usually, somewhat famous. These are famous people. Okay, that's not what I was here to talk about. What's interesting to me is that you guys found so many cool things that we could steal, things that we could learn from them. Can I highlight that to make it extra woo? For instance, in the Alexie piece, I already mentioned the repetition. That was one of the things on the board. Plenty of you noticed that. Some of you pointed out that he summarized lots of little anecdotes, allowing him to squeeze a lot of content in. That was one of my questions, kind of how much did they use summary versus how much did they use scenes? And I was doing that because I was thinking of you. I was thinking of you writing your literacy narrative, and sometimes the brainstorming I've had you do was focused on scenes, right? Think of a specific memory when this thing happened. But sometimes you got other things, with causes and effects and other surrounding stories that you want to just kind of give the really quick version of. So I think we should be keeping our eyes open to say when when did authors choose to summarize, like Alexie does, I think, for a lot of his, and when do they really dig into a scene and slow down, like with dialogue and everything? Is this boring that I'm just typing at you all the time? I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Barrientos. Like she has this moment, and it's so important. She talks about her mom bringing them into school just a little bit late because they were on that vacation, right? And it says, at the school's office, the registrar frowned when we arrived. New paragraph. You people, your children are always behind, and you have the nerve to bring them in late. This piece rings with so much power because she puts that quote in. We need that dialogue. We need to slow down, right? We got to hear that. And then we get to hear mom's response, right? My children, my mother answered in a clear, curt tone, will be at the top of their classes in 2 weeks. Mic drop from mom. 1 point mom, 0 points registrar. My point here is that you might have that. You might have a memory or a line of dialogue or a thing that happened that was so important and so impressive. You've got to write that into your literacy narrative. But you might have a bunch. You might want to write a little more like Sherman Alexie, where in a single paragraph we learn kind of about his father overall and about the kind of books he had overall and where they got books overall and the kind of things they had overall. As opposed to we don't get a line of dialogue from his dad. That wasn't what he needed to do at that point. I would say that Alexie is at times poetic. He is a poet. He was a novelist too. He writes all kinds of stuff. I mean, just one line towards the end, he says, when he's talking to kids, trying to get them to read books, he's trying to encourage the Indian kids on reservations to read books as a means of empowerment. And what Alexie says is, I throw my weight against their locked doors. I throw my weight against their locked doors. He doesn't mean he doesn't mean literally. They're not actually behind locked doors, but when someone has that closed off appearance, it's like a locked door, and he barges in with books. I wonder, is that something we could do? Is that something that feels good to you? Could you, as you're writing your literacy narrative, could you think, what's a metaphor or a simile or something to kind of enliven my language? This is an appropriate assignment to do that. Finally, I wanted to draw attention to his beginning, and again, as a way to encourage us to think about our very first line in our essays. He just says, I learned to read with a Superman comic book. A lot of you pointed that out. It's kind of like a surprising. It's kind of attention-getting. You're like, what? Who learns to read with Superman? That's why I tell people that I learned to read from Big Bird, because it's kind of just like a fun story, right? Do you have that? Maybe not in your first draft, maybe not in your second, but when you turn in your final one, can you make sure that first thing that readers hear will grab us? In Barrientos, you guys pointed out, again, all kinds of great stuff. Someone pointed out this great point that there's flashback paired with just enough analysis. She does pause at times and say, hey, here's the thing that I want you to understand from the story I just told you. And we'll be doing a lot of that in our literacy narratives. Kind of, you tell a story, you tell a flashback, but let me pause and tell you kind of the context around it, or the causes or the effects around it, I already mentioned the dramatic dialogue. I think it's interesting that you could go back and forth on this. Does she make herself look not 100% great? That's the wrong way to put it, because she is likable, right? She comes across as honest, and that's actually something someone else put. She does make us trust her by letting us in on her thoughts, the things that she didn't even say to the people around her. We hear that and we're like, oh, you trusted us with that, thanks. But her story could be a little embarrassing. It could be I feel really bad that I'm signing up for language lessons again in the language that I feel like I kind of should have learned growing up. There's something engaging about that, right? There's something honest. There's something that makes me like her. It's like these two are actually a little bit connected. And though I mentioned the beginning of the last one, let me mention the ending of Barrientos, because again, the same way we can think about what's the first thing people have when they come to our essay, I think we can do the same with the end. We kind of have this little powerful moment. And let me just read it. She says, if it will help, I will go first. Aquí estoy. Spanish challenged and pura Latina. She's purely Latina. She doesn't bother to define it. I mean, that's another thing, right? She uses Spanish words without bothering to translate. There's something powerful there, right? There's something powerful about saying, you know, this isn't something that I need to do for you. Now, I think that's also related to her context. I don't know if you read that little like stuff at the beginning, but this was originally published in a magazine called Latina, a bilingual magazine published by and for Latinas. So her rhetorical situation, her audience is inherently probably going to be bilingual. Otherwise, they wouldn't be reading this. You know, you're reading it because some textbook author pulled it out and said, "Oh, let's put this in the textbook." But that wasn't its original intention. Okay, so let me just like close up really fast here and give you a sense of what my point is here. Well, if we look ahead, the homework that I'm asking you to do for Wednesday is to do a little bit more reading, to read this Rebel music piece and then to read two by students. And again, I want you to keep asking yourself, what could I steal from them? What could I steal from James, from Nia, from Felsenfeld? And you see, I even gave you like an optional third student one if you're feeling confused by this. What can we learn from Kara? How did they start things? How did they end things? How much balance did they have between summary and scene? Did they include dialogue or not? How long were their paragraphs? Were they short? Were they, all those things that I asked you before, keep asking yourself those things because I want to hear your thoughts on those when you go forward. Again, the move is always, what can you learn from this? How can we grow? I think that's one of the best ways to learn to write. You analyze what someone else did, and then we try it on for size. This is the perfect place to do that. So stay on top of that reading. I'm looking forward to seeing your proposal and a sample paragraph on your literacy narrative. We'll talk more about that later, of course. That part is due on Friday, but I'll see you later. Okay, thanks. Bye.